Let's get into it here on Outnumbered. My co-hosts, Emily Compagno, Kayleigh McEnany, also with us, Dagan McDowell, and in the virtual center seat today, Lawrence Jones. A lot there, Lawrence. I do think that it's worth mentioning that he already anticipates this fight. And it's also worth mentioning that some of the criticism starts with, well, what does this do to make us safer? Exactly.
Well, yeah, that's the big question. And I've been jotting down notes throughout his entire speech. First of all, I don't think it's appropriate to start off this conversation by saying it's a hobby of yours. But since he used those words, I would think that the President of the United States would be educated on the issue. He honed in on three cases. He talked about Stoneman Douglas, he talked about Pulse nightclub, and Sandy Hook. Well, Stoneman Douglas and the Pulse nightclub, they were warned. The FBI was warned about this. So these red flags that he was alluding to, if they directly notified the FBI, what more flags would have done to stop those killers? So that's one case. He also talked about Sandy Hook. As you know, this perpetrator killed his own mother. He could not purchase his own gun. He stole that gun from his mother after assassinating his own mother. There was no red flags were there. He did not legally have to purchase a firearm. He stole that firearm. So that's another thing right there. He talked about immunity to the gun stores, for the gun stores. Now, do you want to hold gun stores accountable for the actions of other people? Now, it's one thing if they illegally sell a gun to someone. I think all Americans would agree that there's some criminal liability for that. But if someone's decided to carry out this attack and they had no idea they legally sold the gun to them, that doesn't make sense to me. Last thing is, I know this is something minor, but I think it's appropriate since we're having the conversation. If you're going to talk about the ATF, maybe you should say the name right. It's not the ATE. Okay. And lastly, Harris, as someone that lives in New York City and is from the state of Texas, I feel less safe here. Criminals are out of control here. They have talked about defunding the police. Cops are back away, and I don't have a firearm in this city to defend myself. So a lot to unpack. I know I just threw a lot out there, but I think the guy that is the president should know a lot of this stuff.
So this is interesting. So you know what? While you were taking notes, I was working with the team on getting, not from the weekend, because we know the numbers of shootings and deaths in Chicago, Illinois, as we get closer to the summer, they pop every weekend. But just on Monday and Tuesday alone of this week, shootings 35, deaths 7. And why do we mention that? Because I have the guest list, and I see who's in the Rose Garden. There were a lot of people who were clapping. I just wonder how many of those people are having these types of spikes, particularly during the pandemic, and what they would say is on this list that would make a difference in their cities. I mean, wouldn't they already be doing them? Kayleigh, I come to you.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Harris. And I think you just hit on, to me, what was the most important takeaway. There were a number of red herrings there. Him pointing to things, saying they'd fix the problem when they wouldn't. They're meant to distract. But for you to mention crime on the street, I think this is so important because we in the Trump White House would constantly bring up in Democrat-controlled streets, we are seeing crime go up, and it is a travesty for these urban communities. It was nice to finally hear a Democrat admit to that today, that in fact in these urban communities they're seeing this increase. But guess what? None of this gun legislation would fix any of that because Department of Justice data tells us 90% of crimes committed with guns by inmates are committed with guns that are already illegal. So none of this would do anything, be it the Charleston loophole he mentions. That's imaginary. That doesn't exist. The FBI had a data entry problem. There was no loophole. The gun show loophole he mentions, if you are an FFL, someone who sells a firearm, you still have to go through a background check no matter where you sell it. So these are all red herrings, and it ignores the people like Legend Taliaferro, the little boy who lost his life laying in his bed because of crime in the streets, because it avoids the real problem, which the Trump administration just quickly, with Operation Legend, partnered with local communities, locked some of these people up. That changes things, not to fund the police and imaginary gun changes.
All right, so there was something on the list. I had on Joey Jones, Fox contributor, also a former bomb technician for the Marines, so he knows munitions. And he said, one of the false flags in all of this is how much politics are not being talked about. But there's a lot of politics on Joe Biden's list. He points to something called ghost guns. Did you notice that's where the president first started? With ghost guns, things that people can manufacture on their own. I want to listen from Joey, and then Dagan, I'm coming to you.
So you can buy a block of aluminum off the internet, and if you have a drill press and jigs and all types of tools that cost thousands of dollars, you can take that block of aluminum and turn it into a lower receiver of an AR. If you can show me a criminal on the street that has thousands of dollars to spend on those tools to turn that block of aluminum into a gun, then I'll show you someone who does not care about this executive order and will find a way to do it anyway. So does this make us safe? No, it does not. Does it give Joe Biden a little bit of meat on the bone to say he did something today? Absolutely.
Dagan.
Joey also commented on the fact that in the release from the Biden administration, it asserts that these firearms can be assembled in as little as 30 minutes, and that is absolutely ridiculous. But what this part of the order about the ghost guns, what it is trying to do, again, going after law-abiding citizens and legal gun owners, because what they're trying to do is redefine the federal definition of a firearm as broadly as possible, to require serialization and background checks be conducted on unfinished frames and unfinished receivers, as many as possible. That's from Second Amendment advocate Cam Edwards. But be careful here. You want to talk about the politics, and Kaylee brought up the total misinformation, the misinformation out of Biden about the murderer down in South Carolina. That murderer, that was a screw up by the FBI, just like down in Florida at the Pulse nightclub. The FBI had the report on that South Carolina murderer 3 months before that shooting. And they had 2 days left in the 3-day waiting period. They abandoned the search of those records. So this goes to these orders don't do anything to stop mass shootings. But what they do is politically, this is Republicans are going to use this against the Democrats for the midterm elections, that they're coming for your guns. We can never, ever forget, this is this is a constitutional guaranteed right for Americans to bear arms. And just one more thing, this new head of the ATF, he is a gun control advocate, and he made fun of people buying guns, said people were buying guns to fight off the zombie apocalypse. So that's who's running the ATF.
You're talking about David Chipman, who he announced as his nominee for director of ATF today. So I always look at where people start. It tells you a lot. If you are already expecting a headwind, Emily Compagno, and you say these words, well, you don't have to worry about the Second Amendment, because anything that would suggest that what he's pushing, Joe Biden, wouldn't be good for the country and make you safer would be phony arguments. So I start there. Is there, what you see legally, anything that makes us safer in that list?
The short answer is no. And for viewers, I'd just like to call out a few additional points as well. So he directed 5 federal agencies to make changes to the 26 existing different programs to direct vital support to the community violence intervention programs, quote, as quickly as possible. Now, reminder, the president has already proposed a $5 billion investment in community violence intervention programs over 8 years under his infrastructure package. And I think I would say that it would be a safe assumption that for the families of violence there on the streets, that they probably just want enforcement. They probably just want deterrent consequences for these violence, right? That creating more legislation and creating more laws that restrict the rights of lawful gun owners certainly does nothing to quell the violence, as my colleagues have been pointing out. He also directed the Justice Department to issue an annual report on firearms trafficking, which the ATF hasn't done since the year 2000. The Mexican government estimates that we traffic over 200,000 firearms across the border, and the State Department has spent almost $55 billion over the last 5 years to help Mexico in this effort. So a lot of these things sort of require a bird's eye view to know how our tax dollars have been spent, and in the context of why or why not it would be effective, and certainly for the issues today, ineffective.
Bingo.
You know, and I don't know that we can answer this question, but it is on the minds of people. You heard Lauren say it. You know, people are they coming for people's guns? That's what people are going to watch this today, and that's what they're going to wonder. Well, how does this change if I'm a gun owner? Emily, just real quickly.
I'll close with this final point. Biden said that if he could make one change out of all of these, it would be lifting the immunity that he says dealers and gun manufacturers now enjoy, even though there are plenty of exceptions. Reminder, a Pennsylvania court ruled just in November that that actually is an unconstitutional law. So look for that fight ahead in terms of the ability of people to sue effectively. But again, I think it's focusing on the wrong option here.
Okay. Just ahead, the Biden administration releasing staggering new numbers on the border crisis. Stay with us.